moving. So attitudes, when we're talking about attitudes, we are not talking about this type of attitude here. I know we all know lots of people that we might think have an attitude, but that's not what we're talking about. So an attitude is a learned and relatively stable evaluation of a person or thing. So again, keywords, you learn attitudes, and they're relatively stable evaluation of a person or thing. So these aren't our quick changing thoughts and dispositions, like I feel like tacos tonight, or maybe we should go out for Thai. That's not an attitude. An attitude is like a learned, relatively stable evaluation of a person or thing. So for example, I don't like vacuuming. That's an attitude. I've learned it, I did vacuuming and I didn't like it, and it's relatively stable. I don't see myself liking it anytime soon. And attitudes can influence behavior. I don't like vacuuming, so I'm not going to do it. Obviously, I do have to do it, but that's just an example of how attitudes can influence behavior. And sometimes we talk about like the tri-component model. I think that might be the name of it, or like the ABC kind of components of an attitude. And that's referring to the fact that attitudes are comprised of A, B, and C, the three different components. So an affective component, so that's like our feelings, our emotions, a behavioral component, and a cognitive component. So it's like a thinking component. My vacuum example, an affective component, maybe vacuuming makes me sad or mad. I don't know. Behavioral component, I'm less likely to vacuum. And a cognitive component, I really don't like vacuuming. That's my thought process. So that's just an example. So we can also have implicit and explicit attitudes. So an implicit attitude is involuntarily formed, unconscious, and we're actually not always aware that we hold them. So an example of this can actually often be like racist implicit attitudes. People might claim they're not racist, but their actions might actually, or their language might actually speak otherwise. They might actually not be even aware because it might have been involuntary formed. Maybe it was passed down through primary socialization. That's just one example. And they're often unconscious, so the person might not even know about it. Whereas our explicit attitudes, like the deliberately formed conscious attitudes, we could tell someone about, and it usually aligns with behavior. Do you have any examples in your own life? I know for me personally, the explicit attitude I gave you earlier was that I didn't like vacuuming. But I probably can't really tell you many examples of implicit attitudes that I have because we're not always aware that we have them. Sometimes we can be, but not usually. So, like I said before, our explicit attitudes especially, but any attitude really, our attitudes usually align with our behavior. I don't like vacuuming, therefore I'm not going to do it all that much. It would be quite strange if I said, I don't like vacuuming, I do it twice a day, every day. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So what happens when our attitudes and our behaviors don't line up? So for example, the example we'll talk about a bit here is Charlie thinks smoking is disgusting, but does it anyway. Attitude, doesn't like smoking, and behavior, smoking, doesn't line up. For example, Susan loves reading and she knows it's good for her, but she never does it. Her attitudes, her feelings, her thoughts, her beliefs don't line up with her behaviors. And what happens when they don't line up? Cognitive dissonance, which is the yucky, uncomfortable feeling of like internal tension we get when they don't line up and that we need to resolve. So how do we deal with it? So we can deal with cognitive dissonance in a few ways. The first one is by changing the behavior to match the attitude. So with the example of Charlie, like we said before, Charlie thinks smoking is disgusting, but does it anyway. That's going to result in cognitive dissonance because the attitude and the behavior doesn't line up. So to resolve this cognitive dissonance, Charlie could change the behavior to match the attitude. Okay, I think smoking's disgusting, so I'm going to quit. Then the attitude and behavior would line up. You could also change the attitude to match the behavior. You know what? Charlie's actually okay with smoking now. So Charlie is okay with smoking and smokes. They changed their behavior. Or, number 3, you could reduce the importance of the attitude and behavior. I smoke. I think it's gross. Well, I don't smoke. Charlie smokes. Charlie smokes. Charlie thinks it's gross, but it's not important, I'll do it anyway. Or our fourth option, you could add a new thought to support the behavior or attitude, or develop a new attitude to justify the contradiction. So for example, Charlie might acknowledge that yes, smoking is bad, but I eat really well and exercise a lot, so it's okay. So Charlie has added a thought or an attitude to justify the cognitive dissonance. There's different ways we can process it. And it happens to all of us because no one is completely consistent with their attitudes and behaviors. For example, I think it's very important to always be kind and loving to people, but I do, of course, I make mistakes sometimes and I don't always express that attitude. And then I feel really bad and guilty when I do have that contradiction because I know I didn't treat someone how I should have. But the question is, when do you stick to your attitudes? Or when do you consider that maybe your attitudes were wrong and need to be changed for the better? So when should you change an attitude? When should you change a behavior? It's a question we all struggle with every single day, even if you don't know it.